So I want to thank everyone who is joining today. And for those of you who will be listening to the recording, we're very excited to talk today about helping employees thrive using digital coaching to transform employee well-being. We are recording today's session, so just as a kind of PSA for those attending. My name is Dr. Liz Pavese, and I am a Senior Behavioral Scientist here with CoachHub. And what that really means is that I get to work, with many different teams internally here to help our customers really get the most out of their digital coaching solutions, and partner very closely, with our customer success teams, our sales reps, our marketing team to really bring all of this to life for our customers. And I'm so excited to welcome Matthew Brown, who's the Chief People and Culture Officer at Schoox and has over 20 years of experience in IT, HR, L&D, managing very complex HR and IT transformations, training and learning and development initiatives, talent management programs. And we're going to hear a lot from Matthew today around, the changes and transformation that he's leading at Schoox, and dive really deeply into some of the new things that he's bringing to the company to really support learning, growth, and development and employee well-being. So Matthew, welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
It is a pleasure. Thank you for having me. I'm excited, so excited about our conversation today.
Awesome. So as we unpack our journey today, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the context around well-being in the workplace. We're going to then speak a little bit around how digital coaching can be a powerful tool for enabling employee well-being. And then we're going to go really deeply into the Schoox experience and hear about their journey around employee well-being, as well as how coaching is really being a powerful lever within that journey. And then we'll wrap up with some key takeaways and have some opportunity for questions and answers toward the end of the webinar. And so feel free to write in the chat box, any questions that you might have throughout, so we can make sure that we address them, as many as possible toward the end of today. So in starting off, I wanted to kind of bring sort of a visual storyline, to really this conversation. And there have been so many experiences in the last couple of years. And with the pandemic, many of us may have been in a place, in a mindset, in a headspace that has felt very much like this picture here. While others really may have been experiencing something that feels more like this. Some very unique and different experiences from that first picture, and some very similar ones, I think. And I think what all of this sort of, for many of us, certainly not, the entire workforce, but what has happened is that our experiences from the pandemic, from social issues to other political issues, all of these different converging forces have further and further forced us literally into these boxes, into these square windows for our work, have forced us into the square boxes of our homes or in other places, but sort of confinement into these tiny little boxes. And that's really called so much attention to well-being, holistic well-being, certainly from a mental health perspective, but an emotional perspective, spiritual perspective, physical perspective. And that's not necessarily a new thing, the health and well-being of our people, but we now have a very bright shining spotlight on the health and well-being of our people, and really looking at our employees truly as whole people. And so what I think historically has happened, and really, feel free to layer in on this, Matthew, that when we've talked about well-being in the workplace in the past, we've stayed sort of at the surface level. It's really been maybe talked about and approached just from the tip, like focusing on the tip of that iceberg. And there's so much more underneath that we haven't really come to grips with until maybe now. And we know that, and especially at work, or we know that well-being has a significant impact on how we show up at work, like our whole person well-being. We know that work is a real source of potential positive and negative influences on our well-being. So it's a mutual sort of influence. I'd love to kind of hear a little bit, how has that shift maybe been happening or taking root for you?
I think, personally, I've been on the same kind of journey as you were just describing and kind of went through that. I've worked remote for years, and kind of working inside the box, as it were, is not something new, but it felt very different in the last 18 months. Now 20 plus months. I think one of the things that I've seen really shift across all industries, across all organizations, employees have come to this place of reckoning, for lack of a better way to describe it, right? We've all been through this thing together, and it's made us all really think through what matters. What are our internal barometers telling us? What kind of our core values, and how do I hold true to that? And we maybe haven't done that as personal exercises in the past, or maybe we did in our personal lives, but we felt like we didn't need to bring that to work. And we're seeing that come through loud and clear. Everybody that I talk to, all of the industry research is talking about how this is really, for the first time, being opened up in a conversation at work. And I think there's sort of a challenge because people need to talk through, they need to explore, but don't necessarily come with a level of trust that might be necessary to really engage in the discussion and explore things to the fullest extent.
Yeah, I think, that level of trust thing that you just mentioned has been a historical barrier, and I think still is a little bit, right? And so why, talking about well-being in the workplace has historically been one of the reasons it's been a challenge is because of this issue of disclosure being a barrier, right? So if you look at, and this is, certainly a little bit of an older statistic, but, back in 2016, CAPD published that only around 1 in 2 employees really want to be honest about their well-being at work, and particularly with their manager. Because of a lot of different reasons. It's not normalized. There's some stigma associated when we talk about well-being. And sometimes there's that stigma because of cultural differences, traditional beliefs. Also, I think a misunderstanding of what we mean by well-being. It's not just a mental and emotional thing. There are other components that make up well-being, as well as that understanding of the connection between all of the different spheres of our lives, right? We're not siloed people, we're not siloed individuals. The good news is that, through the experiences in the last 2 years, employees are slowly opening up and feeling more comfortable, having more of that felt vulnerability and trust to open up with their coworkers, to raise more concerns with their managers. So they're still low percentages, but it's a positive trajectory. And I think that's a really great news because when we see, the willingness to reach out to HR, which we could probably spend a whole other day talking about some of what's in that circle. I think it's really great that we're seeing this trend in people really being a little bit more trusting to open up and talk about these issues to really help and support one another. Another barrier I think that's led into this is around the misunderstanding of burnout. And burnout is sort of an outcome from an organizational perspective, which is a result of chronic workplace stress when you are highly, highly engaged in your work. So it affects your higher performers much more disproportionately than it does most of your other employees. And there are distinct phases that lead to burnout. Burnout in and of itself, isn't, its own state, but there are many different stressors and things that if we learn how to identify it and talk about our experiences and our well-being, we can recognize emotional exhaustion, for example, the cynicism part of it, as well as that feeling of inefficacy. So I think breaking some of this apart and bringing more understanding to phenomenons like burnout will also really help us build those levels of trust and build that confidence and build well-being into more of our vocabulary, and putting that at the center of how we think about people, because we're talking about people.
I know there's been, in regard to this topic of burnout, I've heard a lot of conversations across the HR community, and just employee communities as well, where I think it's really important that we highlight that misunderstanding burnout is a big issue. I think a lot of organizations really, during the midst of the pandemic, felt like that was the culprit, and it was because we were displaced into virtual environments, and that was creating the burnout. The issue existed long before that shift ever took place. The shift just highlighted it. It gave us, it took away some of the tools that we use to cope in that office environment, or in that normal day that we experienced in 2019 and early 2020. It's been fascinating to hear people kind of debate what the source of burnout is and what we really mean by burnout.
Yeah, I mean, it's going below the surface and looking for those root causes, right? The lack of enablement, inefficient processes, not having those different support mechanisms. So it's absolutely, I think, fascinating to really start challenging what we think we know about it, and really bring some concreteness to it, because it can be mitigated and solved for in a very proactive way. And, really, I mean, what does this all amount to, right? We know that mental health at work is super important. Well-being at work is really important. It has a bottom line impact when we are seeing, issues because of poor mental health or poor, physical, emotional, spiritual well-being. There's losses in productivity due to all kinds of then end states that can be an outcome of poor well-being. But if we take some proactive measures, there can be significant returns in a very positive way, as well as having lower, higher engagement, lower churn, et cetera. So there certainly is, I don't probably have to convince many of you on the call today that there's certainly the business case for it, but how do we really start to tackle this in meaningful ways and start to get ourselves on a journey in a much more sort of proactive, opportunistic perspective? And wanted to share, these last two sort of figures here that, before we jump in, we have, actually going to close this for a second. While 96% of companies globally have made changes to their HR policies, that there really is less of that feeling of support still from employees. When we just look at sort of like a policies and procedures and sort of programmatic view of some solutioning here. When we look at some other views of this, and we think at the leadership experience that, from Brian Thornton had reported, leaders are reporting that the primary value that they're finding in a intervention such as coaching is really talking about their well-being, right? Because it's centering on them as a person, which is at the center of everything that they're doing, whether they're showing up at home, as a father, or showing up in a friend circle, reconnecting, with people after being disconnected for a long time, or showing up, at work at a moment in time to be there for an employee or a coworker, or just to be there and do your best work. We have to think about kind of what we're bringing to that conversation and to that table. And so coaching is starting to really surface as a really powerful tool. And I'd love to, if we could relaunch that poll and look at, I don't know if Carly, we're going to be able to redo that. Here we go. If we could just take a couple minutes, I'd love to get a pulse on those that are on the call. Have you ever considered coaching as a part of the well-being benefit for your employees?
I'm really curious about the results of this one, because again, I think there's been a lot of shift in the last 2 years in how we think about coaching, how we think about well-being, and how we think about even what goes in the bucket of what we would call a benefit of some sort.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're starting to see that shift with a lot of organizations. It's not the traditional view of how we leverage that, but it could be super powerful. Okay. We're going to close that and see if that really worked. Here we go. Okay. So we have actually, wow, we have like 61% that are saying yes. I'm actually really surprised by that, which is great. I mean, that's really, really good. Some that are no, and others that are not sure. Very, very interesting. Well, that's really what we're here to talk about, even more today. So how can we really be more proactive in supporting our employees in this well-being journey? Coaching can be part of that solution. And so let's really sort of dive deeply into Schoox and your story there, Matthew, and see, what we can learn from, what you are all doing.
I'm really excited by those results. It is truly a testament that the times are changing, and that businesses and minds and hearts are evolving and changing in some much needed ways. So at Schoox, we are a learning management talent development solution provider. Our mission is to help companies and their employees learn more, connect deeper, adapt faster, and perform better through the technology that we bring to market. And just a little bit about our organization, we are growing rapidly. So we're more than 175 employees today. Huge, huge leap in the last 2 years with the growth we've seen. Our customer base takes us into 30 plus countries, a lot of users around the globe, and a lot of languages that get pulled in. So the story here is really we're a company that's centered around learning, and we serve businesses in that context. And it's fun to be able to exist in that space as a practitioner and also as a vendor where we can see what's happening in other companies and across different industries to really get a pulse on what's happening. Over the last 18 to 24 months in particular, we have seen some significant growth. And that's required us to think differently about how we attack the problems that face the employee population, whether it be development or career growth or mental health and wellness, how to be successful in a remote environment. All of these things kind of come up for employees time and time again, and it's not unique to our organization. I think we were a little bit unique in that we saw substantial growth during a time where a lot of businesses were seeing trends in the other direction, where a pandemic might have been forcing furloughs or reduction in workforce. We are a learning tech company, and learning really catapulted to the main executive agenda around the globe last year. Being in learning for 20 years, right, I'm used to clawing for dollars and trying to earn the respect might be too strong of a word, but really earn the hearts and minds of leaders in the companies that I worked for. That learning should have a seat at the table, and we should put our energy into that. So at Schoox, as we were growing really, really quickly over the last 12 months, we wanted to make sure that we were spending time focusing on how to sustain, how to develop people along the way, how to help navigate all of the change that comes as you're growing, as you're adding new people to the organization, and also helping people to really understand who we are. As somebody that's worked in a lot of industries and several different companies, I can say very confidently that our company culture is quite unique. We're proud of it. We really pour a lot of our heart and soul into our people. We understand that if we miss the mark there, everything else really is not as high of importance. We'll say it that way. But as you grow, you do come across a lot of challenges as the organization changes shape and the dynamics change. As I mentioned, we welcome people into the organization, but we really want them to understand that we mean what we say and we say what we mean. And we want to encourage feedback. We want to, our mission from a people and culture perspective, it essentially summed up says we are not successful as an HR department if our employees cannot tell us that they feel seen, heard, valued, and that we have created a pathway for them to contribute successfully to the organization. We also want to really acknowledge all of our differences, because when we can understand those differences, we can make some really magical things happen by developing a really, really well-oiled machine, leveraging all of the perspectives to think differently, to creatively problem solve in ways that maybe we hadn't thought about before. And as you do this, it really amps up the employee engagement factor, which then spills over to the customer, right? So your experience is just going to exude out to anybody that you interact with, because you're lighting up when you're at work, and that's what we really have tried to maintain. Now, over the last 24 months, as we've seen a lot of new employees come into the organization, we've also instituted a few new levels of management. And when you do that, of course, it creates some challenge. And in addition to that, building a lot of our team. So really building out our learning team in full capacity. And it takes time once you get the team created to go and build the things that are necessary. And as we looked at where we could pour our energy, it really made sense that we wanted to dive in and help our managers as quickly as possible to understand what it means to be a coach and how to effectively be coaches for their employees. And we run a global operation, so we're talking about multiple countries. We're talking about different time zones. We have teams that are split across the countries, and so there's a lot of dynamics at play. And we're running as hard as we can to build some robust and immersive leadership development experiences that we will launch next year. But we couldn't wait for that. We knew that the time was now, and so earlier this year, we were blessed to be able to bring the idea to our CEO that says, I think CoachHub is what we need. I think we need the coaching services to really deploy to our people managers and help us kind of help people unlearn a few things. Most notably, when we talk about coaching, there is, I found it time and time again, there is this negative stigma that gets attached to coaching, right? It's you're trying to fix a problem. I did something wrong. It's just my way of maybe getting reprimanded or counseled for negative. And that's the opposite. In our minds, it's let's give you this tool, as many tools as we possibly can pour into our employees and our managers for success. And so we started the journey actually back in January and said, we're an LMS provider. We have access to a course marketplace where we've curated content from a lot of really great providers for consumption by our customers. So we went out and said, we're going to license all that content, give it to all of our employees. And that was a first big shot of let's really do something to try and move the needle. And then as we fast forward in time, in March, we amped up our surveys. We really wanted to understand what mattered to people. And it took a few different runs at the surveys to really get the right kind of feedback that we were looking for. Again, kind of goes back to this helping people to unlearn. We would ask a question that sounded like, tell us what kind of topics matter to you from a training perspective. And what we heard back was what sounded a lot like what they thought we wanted to hear. Right? Like, I want development in my position. I want development to get to my next position. And what we were trying to get at was really to understand what excites our people, what ignites their passion, and how can we somehow tap into that at work? How can we allow them to access some of those things so that they do get to feel fulfillment and they get to feel that excitement that comes when you get to access those things that are really passionate for you? And so in March, we turned on a series of surveys and really got to, and we turned on an interesting platform that gives us an employee sentiment view, really helps us understand more of the, we'll call it a heat map of the culture health. And through there and some of our other survey mechanisms, we were able to build this bigger picture that led us to expand our learning ecosystem. We have our solution that we use all day, every day as our learning management system. And then we stacked on third-party content. And then we said, well, our employees really told us they wanted more. They wanted different things. They wanted to nurture their curiosities about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging topics. They really wanted to understand just in general mental health and well-being in this pandemic world. How do I navigate that, and what are the tools that I might need to be able to access? And we heard a lot of professional development requests that came in. I really want to grow in this direction, and one of our intentions at Schoox is really to dispel this myth of a career path being very linear and very flat. Right? Everybody kind of thinks that I'm a junior, insert whatever the title is, and my next position is a senior, and then my next position is the manager of that function. And so a lot of times people find themselves waiting for that position, that one position to open up. And it's our belief that any employee of Schoox should be able to navigate to any position within the organization. We just have to know that that's an interest. We have to be able to understand what the interest is, why it's an interest, and then we can help pave that path and kind of help develop and nurture and grow. And then in September, we ran very, very hard and fast to the finish line to get CoachHub turned on for our managers. The intention there, again, is we know we've got some things coming in 2022 that are really going to be immersive leadership development programs, but we couldn't wait for them. Our employees need their managers to be effective, and our managers need our support to do that. And CoachHub was one way that we could run at that pretty quickly. And it's been incredible to see the kind of results that we've seen from that. Again, I think there were some interesting challenges at the beginning when we were talking about coaching for our people leaders, having to really dispel that myth that coaching is because you did something wrong. We're not giving you this tool in your toolbox to fix a behavioral problem. We're saying, hey, we're doing a lot of things in the background, but we can't run fast enough. And we know that you need some additional help. And because we really are trying to really break the mold and help people think outside of their personal or their professional square, we'll call it, right? That professional box that I live in, break out of that and really figure out what excites you, what you want to learn more about, what you're curious about, what you don't like. And so, right, like you got to get a level of trust built, and you've got to sort of work against that experience, because not a lot of people have had access to coaching.
For sure. Sure. It sounds like, I mean, it's an incredible journey that you've been on in such a short period of time. And, you talked a lot about, the unlearning, and you mentioned, and I think there's unlearning in a couple different ways that it's showing up. So correct me if I'm wrong, but certainly the unlearning that you talked about from that shift in mindset of like, what does it really mean to be a manager? And what does it mean to be a manager or a leader here at Schoox? That might be, kind of unwinding some of that. I think when we were chatting a couple weeks ago, that like boss mentality, right?
Yes.
What I'm also kind of hearing is that you're helping people unlearn some of, maybe I'll just use the word traditional, right? Traditional approaches to learning and growth and development, which requires then a sort of another layer of the change that you're managing. Can you talk to us a little bit about, first, what are some of those other maybe skills and capabilities? You talked, certainly about, some at a high level that you're helping leaders sort of unlearn in the context of, what it is that Schoox is trying to accomplish strategically.
I think, one of the biggest things that we've been trying to solidify within our organization is really helping people to come to this place of healthy appreciation for vulnerability, right? Like there is this perception that my managers, whatever level they're at, my manager is perfect and impervious, and they have some sort of like magic book that they got when they got into the role that gives them everything they need to know. And so they always have the answers. They don't make mistakes. And it's quite the opposite. Right. As a company that's rooted in learning, we understand that you can't learn you can't really learn if you do everything perfect all the time. You have to have opportunities to do something wrong, to have a failure or a misstep, and then learn how to pick yourself up from that. There's a lot of value in that. And I think, a lot of organizations struggle with that. We put some really unfair expectation on employees to perform at a certain level for an extended period of time without taking into account the realities that surround them. And when we were locked into this pandemic world, I think some of those things really, it's part of what's contributing to what they're calling the Great Resignation, right? Like there's a lot of unrealistic expectations and perception that managers aren't willing to listen, perception that HR is not willing to listen, perception that if I vocalize that I'm not sure about something, or I vocalize that I've made a mistake about something, that is an immediate target on my back and I'm going to be on some list to get exited out of the organization. And we fully celebrate that opportunity to expose the vulnerability. And I think we've seen every time we have been able to model that behavior, it has a real impact. It is an immediate impact where employees unlock, even just as an HR professional talking with my people leaders, when I'm able to share my own vulnerability in real time, and I'm not shy, I will tell you all the things I've done wrong because it's how I learn. It really opens up this like trust of, so we really can, it's okay to do that. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to really get into that headspace. That's how we start moving the needle on well-being, because it helps remove that layer of stress that people put on themselves. We see it time and time again when I talk to employees at organizations of all kinds. Employees will sit silent. They will carry around things because they have this fear of retaliation. They have a fear of being targeted, a fear of just some negative tag. And what we've seen, and it's evidenced by the poll results earlier, mindset is shifting. And when companies are really willing to embrace the idea of coaching for all that it can offer and not just coaching for a person in their one specific job, but kind of opening the aperture to coach holistically for the entirety of the person, it changes things. And we saw a little bit of challenge getting some trust built right at the very beginning when we were talking from a learning perspective of, hey, like, tell us what matters. Do you want to learn about gardening? People would say, why are you asking that? Well, because we want to know what excites you. We want to know what your passions are. We may not be able to find a way for you to bring gardening into your work at a technology company as Schoox, but we can understand that maybe that gardening is an outlet that is creative control for you, or maybe it's a process and project management thing that you don't get to exercise in context of your day-to-day responsibilities. So really trying to get some of that stuff uncovered so that we can start to figure out where to pour into people.
What an amazing thing. So coming back to that vulnerability piece, right? And you said this before around what we put on our managers and our leaders, like we keep adding to their plate, more and more and more, every day over the years. And we can't expect that level of vulnerability and ability to coach and lead and guide others if we don't allow that space for people to face their vulnerabilities internally, right? And coaching is such a beautiful mirrored process to be able to discover, those strengths within yourselves, those opportunities for where you want to grow and improve, and from all different angles, right? And how that can transfer back into your personal life, into your professional life, into your friendships, into, kind of insert that sphere there. And it sounds like, you're just at the beginning steps of specifically the coaching aspect of this, transforming, unlocking, the manager mindset at Schoox. I loved that when you said that when we chatted last week. And we're seeing some pretty powerful beginning stages of results in how people are responding to this experience, this digital coaching experience. Can you talk to us a little bit about, certainly there's some of the testimonials here and some sort of high level results, but can you share with us a little bit about, the impact that this is starting to have within your organization?
It's been incredible. I think, the first thing that we saw is we were able to build a little bit of equity and trust from kind of just listening and showing people that as they were giving us feedback, we were turning it into action. But when it came time for the coaching conversation, as I mentioned, that sort of negative stigma that follows coaching around, which is I'm in trouble, I did something wrong. There was a hesitancy in the tone that people had when we were talking about coaching is coming for our people leaders. And, we had to really talk about we could have built our own coaching program. I've built several of those for companies that I've worked for, but that's a very traditional way of thinking about coaching, where I'm really looking to coach you in the box that you're in to get to the next box. And what we want to do is really open your heart and mind to explore all the things that might be available to you and think bigger. And in order to do that, we felt that it was necessary to go external and have a group like CoachHub come in, and we had to kind of reiterate for employees that our intention is we are not prescribing what your coaching conversations are about. We don't have access to those coaching conversations. We have access to very little information that helps us understand generally what the themes are and what the focus areas are within the coaching sessions. But it's something that it's yours, it's your personal coach. If you need to use the coaching session to coach through something in your personal life, do it. If you need to coach through something in your professional life, do it. There's no limit. Use as many sessions as you want. We've really tried to encourage repeat traffic. And as you can see by the numbers, I mean, we're at 2 months in, and we've already seen an average of 3 sessions per person. So they've taken it to heart, and some of our people have gone overboard. And I say overboard, meaning that we recommended trying keeping a cadence of every 2 weeks with your coach, so that you could work on something, apply it, and then revisit. And we've seen some people that have been able to schedule like an ad hoc session because they had something that came up sooner or something different that changed along their way. And every leader that I talk to has expressed such appreciation and gratitude. I think first and foremost for the unique opportunity. There's not a lot of companies that are out there taking this kind of a swing at people development and investing the money to really focus on all the tools we can put in the toolbox. And so I think there's been some acknowledgement that the experience is unique to a company our size or a company of any size. But then as they get into the coaching and they start to, the first session is always, let me meet my coach and figure out, is this a match? Is this the right coach for me? Because, just like dating, right, you can have some really good ideas and think it's good. And then you might that first date and you go, no, this is not the one. Yes. And so with coaching, it's the same thing. As you mentioned earlier, we're not like siloed people, and we can't just slice off our personal life and pick it back up when work ends, especially if we work remotely. And it's all one big thing. And so after people got into that, let me meet my coach, and really started to build those bonds, the feedback has been tremendous. The value that it's offering to people in so many different ways. Every person that I've talked to, when and if they share something that they've gleaned from their coaching sessions, there's been no 2 people that have had the same experience and the same 2 key takeaways, which has been such a beautiful thing out of 120 sessions, to not have anybody say, my coach helped me with XYZ.
Absolutely. You can see, I love the top quote that we were able to pull. And I think it speaks to, some of that potential stigma and sort of the anxieties that can come from, a very hyper personalized intervention like this, but, going into a session with a lot of anxiety, and throughout that being put at ease, through whatever that conversation that was held, really started to shine the light on potentially for this person that this is about you, and this is about your, success, your effectiveness in how you define it. So I think that's really powerful, really, really powerful. We have just a couple of key takeaways, and then some questions that are already starting to come into the chat. So I think, out of everything that we talked about today, there are, I think, a few things that have come to my mind in terms of like the so what and what does this all mean for us. And from your story specifically, Matthew, I think what really resonated with me is that in order for us to shift the mindset in our managers and leaders, we also, as learning professionals, HR leaders, OD folks, or just leaders really championing change in our organizations, we have to shift our mindsets first, right? And be bold to take new approaches. And to what you said, it's regardless of organizational size, right? There's many things that you have to unwind and relearn and unlearn, but we need to be bold. And I think, one thing that you mentioned was, how can we push ourselves to be more bold and unapologetically different, because our worlds require us to be different and think differently.
Yes, there's a lot of traumas that we experience in our career, in our professional careers, whether we recognize them and call them traumas or not. They're traumas that shape the way we behave at every company, at every role, in every setting that we go through. And we don't often stop and take the time to really check in and see if the thing that caused us to behave this way or to react in that way in a prior scenario, like, does that still hold true if I started with a new company? Am I still just trying to kind of bring my learned behaviors with me? And the unlearning journey is something we're really passionate about in our employee experience. And it's a fun conversation. It's daunting, right? In some ways it does create like this bubble of stress, because it's, right, you're telling me I can let go of that thing, but what's the catch? And the response is always the same. The catch is you get to free up space to, right, put energy in a different place. You get to kind of pour into yourself in different ways, because you're not having to fight through that layer of stress or that layer of trauma recall every time you go through those scenarios.
For sure. That's a journey for sure, but an important one to face. And the other thing, because I think I already touched on that third one of like the unlearning and relearning, but the last thing that really stuck with me, as we were preparing for this and just through our conversation today, is that learning is really at the center of everything. It's not separate. So you talked about, how you're thinking, where is learning at the center of everything that you do from a people standpoint, not, learning here, performance here, recruit, like all of the different sort of functions that we think about.
Yes.
So that's just something, it's even sort of made me kind of think a little bit about, how do I articulate that? How do I position that? How do I think differently about that?
I think we have found, I personally have found when I work with our employees, when I work with employees at some of our customers, when I talk to people throughout my peer network, I will hear people really articulate that they have been conditioned. My takeaway is that they have been conditioned to think about learning as a prescribed event when it comes to work, right? Like when I'm at work, I go take that training when somebody says, hey, go take that training. But in my life, if my eyes are open and my ears are open, everything I see, smell, hear is new information coming into my brain that I'm having to process. That's learning. Right? Like we could marginalize it and say that's just life and breathing, but that's learning. And there's no reason why we can't adopt that mindset at work. It is a huge shift. But when you can put learning at the center of everything, it really does create a lot more connectivity. And so you can start to move the needle in very different ways.
Absolutely. Amazing. So I want to leave, kind of a food for thought, for everybody before we turn to some questions. And, how can you push yourselves to be more bold or unapologetically different in order to create the changes that you need as you're leading lots of different, initiatives and changes, whether it's from a learning perspective, larger organizational transformation perspective. Maybe ponder this over the next week and see what you come up with. With that, I really want to just Thank you so much, Matthew. This was fantastic. And I'm just going to stop sharing my screen right now so we can have some questions to dive into. So the first one that's come up is, as you have taken upon this investing in digital coaching, how are you looking at measuring the impact of this investment and the intervention itself? It's a very common question we get.
There's there's a lot of layers to that. There's not one specific metric that we're looking at. It's really looking at this holistic approach. So we, as I mentioned, we sort of dialed up some learning initiatives. We have turned on an employee sentiment survey that pulses on a weekly basis, so we understand the health of our culture. We've started standing up a few other tools and survey mechanisms to help us understand skill progression and productivity measures. But we're looking at it as a holistic picture. We're not isolating it to say if someone goes through coaching, then we expect this one lever to be moved. We are looking at the broader picture because we do think that it is an entire company culture evolution that happens when you get all of your people leaders. You get everybody on the same page and moving this direction. So this year we've been capturing some baseline as we've turned on some of these new things with learning and skill assessments and understanding the organizational health. As we go into 2022, we will be starting to look at the population of people who are coachees and what their personal improvements or changes have been, and then also looking at how that has affected the teams, again, through some additional surveys and productivity measures.
Absolutely. I love what you're talking about there is you're thinking about what are some of those leading indicators. For example, some of the results that we showed earlier around, what's that felt relationship between me and myself and my coach? What's the general qualitative experience that people are having that give you an indication of some of these lagging indicators that you're talking about measuring through other mechanisms in your sort of people ecosystem, right? Performance measures, performance ratings, potentially 360, development feedback. So I think what's really important about that is you're thinking about measuring impact in a very holistic way, looking at, what is it relative to the coaching experience and data that you get through that experience. But then what are those other, measures and metrics that you need to pay attention to that are part of the larger story at Schoox that come from other places. So that's great. So, here's a great one. So since you've added coaching, have you received any feedback from leaders who are currently utilizing the tools? What has that feedback been?
That feedback, I'm already excited to get up every day and do my job. The feedback that I get from people as a result of the coaching interactions makes me sad that I can't be two people getting to do this job twice as much. People have really responded favorably because it is such a personalized experience. It is not us as central HR or learning saying we know all the answers and we know what you need. We are instead saying we know the things you've told us that you need, but there's probably some things you're reserving, again, for that trust factor. So you're probably not going to tell us these things. They have an outlet through the coaching. They have a safe space to go and work on a lot of things. And so they have been doing things like having conversations about how to effectively manage performance. We have a company strategy, but as an individual manager, I might be brand new to it and I might not want to raise my hand and say, I've never done that before. And I certainly don't want to get it wrong. So I personally have benefited tremendously from my sessions. I adore my coach. It was like tailor-made, the relationship that we entered into, being able to just expose some things, my own opportunities. Mm-hmm. I know that I really, in all transparency, I suck at taking time off, especially when I love what I do, because it doesn't feel like work and right. Like I feel a loyalty to people and I want to do these things that make me feel good all the time. My coach in session 1 heard some things just in the general get to know you type stuff and said, I'm going to task you with an action. We're going to set some goals to help you fix that and work toward that. not a conversation that I would have had any other way, any other place.
Mm-hmm.
Again, because I just, right, like I've been in other places where you don't raise your hand and have those kind of conversations. And as the guy at the top of the chain for people in culture, there's not a place for me to go with that kind of stuff. And so this coaching outlet has been valuable, personally and then professionally. And the stories from every person that's engaged with their coach has been the same. It's like I've gained a new best friend that is a confidant, that is a professional mentoring coach that's helping me work through anything.
Yeah. One of the things that you just talked about, right, around leadership can be, the adage of like, leadership can be a very lonely place, right? Because there's only so many places you can turn to, right? For some of that, processing, some of that brainstorming, some of that gut check. And that's, such a powerful, coaching for very senior leaders is one of those, why it's such a powerful tool, because it provides that extra space that is required, for the complicated, challenging things that you are shouldering and trying to really lead in organizations. Similarly, though, as you've brought coaching to all people leaders at all levels. How are you seeing, clearly you're seeing an impact at all the different levels, but I'd love to hear a little bit about what you're seeing specifically, when you think about sort of that frontline, leader or manager, given that wasn't something that they had an opportunity for previously.
I think we're seeing a couple of impacts, some that are just directly tied to the coaching, where we're seeing skill growth and progression. We're seeing people take more risks, which is something we really respect and really encourage in our culture, where they maybe haven't done that before. Again, kind of, right, where do I take that information? If I take it to my boss, it sounds like I'm unsure, and I don't want to come across in that way. I want to be very certain about my actions or my interactions and my intentions. And so it's created some safety that has opened up people to really explore risk and explore out of the box thinking in a lot of ways. I think something else interesting happened when we announced that we were moving forward with CoachHub. We did talk about every people leader at every level in the organization, from the CEO to the frontline supervisor. And that set a different sort of tone, where people were like, oh, wait, we're all in this. We're all doing the same thing. We all have our own coaches. And my sessions as an executive might be very different than someone else at a frontline manager role, but we are still accessing the same tool set. And it created a shared trust that I think has propelled people to really dive in head first.
That's awesome. I have one more question, unless there's a few more that come in, because we have a few more minutes left. You talked before, I think very eloquently, around the stigma that's still often associated with coaching. And that was, something that you've even experienced at your time at Schoox. What specifically did you do internally from like your change and communications plan perspective to start tackling that stigma?
It really starts with just accessing that place of vulnerability. And right, when I was able to say, as the head of people and culture, coaching, it's for all of us, and I am jumping in head first. Our CEO is jumping in head first. Just because we are in the positions we're in doesn't mean we know everything. The second we think we know everything is the second we should stop doing what we're doing. Right? Like, we should always continue to learn and strive to learn more, because the world is different every 60 seconds. Every 1 second that ticks on the clock, the world is different. And so it really started with being very vulnerable and upfront about that, to say, this is not something that you're not being put on the island. It's something that we're going to share in together. And I think that opened some conversations. I think continuing to push deeper in that vein of vulnerability, in talking about specific personal experiences and one-to-one settings, has also helped really remove that stigma. But I think challenging to do without that, because you can use all the right words. And I say this time and time again, there are a lot of companies that have a lot of great words on the wall and don't put those words into action. And we have great intentions, and we really, really strive to act every day in the way that the words on the wall articulate that we want to act. But there's a level of trust that has to be established, because we've all been at places that were words on the wall kind of companies. Mm-hmm. And so that vulnerability, I can't express how critical that is, because we also brought coaching in as part of our total wellness program. It's part of our well-being strategy. That also gives it a different dimension, where we are now talking about use the coaching for any and everything that you need the coaching for. And that could be time management at home, because I have 5 kids and 7 pets, and all of these things that I'm just not sure how to juggle because life has been upside down and inside out for 18 months. Use it for that. Use it for tackling a new problem at work. Use it for figuring out where and how you want your career to grow. And we've seen kind of being able to knock that domino over and get our people leaders really subscribed to our intentions, to our people strategy. We really are this way, has then translated to the employee experience. And all of our people leaders are seeing some of those benefits come through, because maybe they're not carrying something into a team meeting, or they're not carrying something forward. They're able to work through it in different ways, or get external objective ideas that they can put into practice and try things out. So it's really, leading by example has created a ripple effect. But I think we could do as much communication as we liked and talk about the benefits and talk about the interactions. But I think it's when we get into that place of vulnerability, especially for something like coaching, that can open and unlock the hearts and minds to get people really invested. Otherwise, they just show up and they do what they think you're expecting them to do, which is coach me for the position that I sit in today and only that position. And as I mentioned, we really want to honor the needs of the entire person, and vulnerability is how you get there.
Awesome. And what's one thing that you're excited about for this next phase of your journey before we close out?
Really, actually, I'm excited about being able to expand the experience more broadly across the organization. Just some of the early results that we've seen has given us a good indicator of the impact that coaching can have on every employee. It's been nice for our people leaders to actually be a coach, right? As a learning professional, I say it all the time, training professionals don't get the love, right? We pour into everyone else, but who trains the trainers? Who develops the learning and development teams? It's the same thing for people managers, right? We tell you to do things, we teach you, but we need to kind of continue moving that forward. And a lot of times we teach you how to coach, but we don't put you in the seat of being coached. And so there's a lot of really valuable things that are coming out of people having that firsthand experience of what a coaching relationship looks like that they can start to model. So I'm excited to see that continue to permeate the organization.
Great. Well, I'm excited for you. I mean, it's been such a pleasure, for us to have you and the organization be such a great partner. And we're so excited to be on this journey with you. Thank you so much, Matthew, for your time, for your insights, the story, and we're looking forward to how that story continues. So thank you, everyone who dialed in today. And thank you for the questions, really great questions from the audience.
And thank you to everyone, those who attended live. Thank you to anybody that listens to this on demand. Don't be shy. Find me on LinkedIn if you have questions, you want to continue this conversation and understand that kind of perspective. Don't be afraid to reach out to the team at CoachHub. So many incredible resources at your fingertips that cost nothing. Don't live in that box that we create for ourselves.
Beautiful. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.